Welcome to the African Transformation Spotlight, brought to you by the African Center for Economic Transformation. We are an African-led, African-driven economic policy institute based in Accra, working across Africa and connected to the world. My name is Belinda Ayamga, Communications Manager here at Asset, and I'll be your host for this edition. I'm pleased to have with me today Dr. Cecilia Conrad, who is CEO for Lever for Change. Lever for Change is a new non-profit affiliate of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, created to accelerate large-scale social change around the world. She is also a member of Asset's Board of Directors, and today we will be talking about her experience, her career across academia, philanthropy, social impact, and how some of her experiences can speak to accelerating economic transformation in Africa. So welcome to the Transformation Spotlight, Cecilia.
Oh, thank you very much.
Good to have you. I think we'll go right into the conversation. Now, as I mentioned earlier, your career spans across academia, philanthropy, social impact. How do you see the role of economic research and data in driving policy changes that are needed for Africa's economic transformation, particularly in the context of Asset's work?
Yes. One of the things that I think we sometimes lose sight of is data and research has an important role both at the beginning of a process and also at the end. So at the beginning, when you think about Asset and why it was formed very much informed by the experience, research, and data that was analyzed by its founder, KY, and a group of other people who are still very much core to the organization, where they wanted to ask the question, how can we bring about the kind of economic growth that also is sustained over time, that is the benefits are widely distributed across a population. And so they studied what experience had been at countries who had managed to do this and came up with this framework of growth with depth and came up with the 4 pillars. So on the front end, there was a lot of research and thinking and looking at data to inform a strategy. But the other important role that data has is looking at whether or not the strategy is working. So you need to look at data and research to understand whether something that you think is going to work is actually having the impact that you believe, whether it's really gaining traction. And so what Asset does is create a kind of, first of all, that framework that was data-informed, research-informed, but also has been very serious about making sure that African economies and African leaders and policymakers have data that's relevant to understanding whether their economies are producing the kind of growth, the transformative growth that can lead to resilience and long-term sustainability.
Yeah. And as someone who has overseen the MacArthur Fellows Program, are there innovative approaches that you think are most needed in Africa, in order to tackle the many economic challenges that we face, youth unemployment, challenges with achieving the Sustainable Development Goals? Are there some innovative approaches that you've seen that you think we can adapt in Africa to tackle these challenges?
Yes, some are already being tried in Africa. Both I've seen from the Fellows Program and then also from some of the big open calls that we have run for Lever for Change. Probably the biggest one is our 100 and Change, but we've run them on lots of other topic areas. And I'm going to take one example where I think it translates beyond the U.S. There's a group in the U.S. called Perscolas, and they were the recipient of a $10 million grant from an economic opportunity challenge that we ran. Right. And what they do is that they do training, workforce training for tech jobs, because that's where the jobs are. They are focused on different types of people. There are people who have finished their post-secondary degrees, but they were in non-technical fields. There are people who have come out of the criminal justice system. There are people who are coming off of public support. And what it is it's an initial training to get you into a first job. They make strong partnerships with employers. So they build trust with employers that the people they train actually have the skills that they say and get them placed. But here's the other part that I think is a really important component of what they've been doing. And that is it's a commitment to that worker after they start the firm to help them move up. to help them continue to do skill development. And I think that's a critical part of a successful strategy in this space, is that you want to get people employed because it's important and you want to have the income, but you also want to make sure that they have upward mobility, that you keep in touch with what are the skills needed for them to actually increase their income over time.
Yeah. And have you seen in Africa, I mean, you did mention that some of it is being done, but within Africa, are we beginning to use some of these strategies? Because, you know, a lot of the times in our governments, there are initiatives that are supposed to create jobs for young people, but a lot of the time it's just a one-touch thing. So we get you into this project and then hello and bye. But have you seen some of these approaches being adapted already?
So there's some programs out there. There's a group called Generations, which I think uses a very similar model to Perscolis. There's the initial training and placement, but then there's also the long-term commitment. There's a program that's actually started in some refugee camps. It's done initially by a U.S.-based university, Southern New Hampshire University, which is a degree accreditation program that helps people get a degree that's accredited in the U.S. But once they ran the program, they realized that, okay, now they have a degree, what do they do? And they started to actively create enterprises that would do things like, for example, grade exams that are done by hand in the U.S., and they need people who can read English and other parts of the world. So there are really some creative thinking about what are the opportunities that are available now that people can do jobs just about everywhere, regardless of where the original demand for the work is. How do you create that, and then how do you build that as a long-term path? So there are some successful examples. They need to scale, and to scale usually requires some public participation on the part of the governments.
Yeah, that is true. And that actually takes me to my next question. So, given your experience, what strategies do you think African governments and also organizations like Asset can adapt in order to attract and effectively utilize investments, philanthropic investment, for instance, for long-term transformation in some of these areas?
Well, you know, one of the things that Asset does, which is very important, is to do both case studies and comparative studies across countries to understand what works. To identify, for example, there's work on vocational training programs. Vocational programs almost everywhere around the world need a kind of revitalization or rethink. And so Asset's looking at what can be done, how can you design, what's the prototype for a program that works. So that kind of, and then creating peer learning communities to learn from each other. So that's the sort of role that an Asset can take. The role that governments can have is actually taking that information and then implementing it, using it to inform a revamp of what existing public programs offer.
My last question to you for this session, do you see any opportunities, or let me say, what are the biggest opportunities, but also what are the biggest challenges that you see for economic transformation over, say, the next decade? And how can institutions like Asset position themselves to lead and to support that journey?
So I'll start with, well, should I start with opportunities or should I start with the challenges? I think I'll start with the challenges. So I'll end with opportunities. It's always good to end on a high note. And, you know, this is a challenging time globally. One of my board colleagues made a really important distinction, I think, and that is that there are two sets of things that we have to worry about in terms of challenges. Some of them are global. There's the increase in global conflict. We're looking at conflict that's revving up in the Middle East at the moment. And there are implications for African countries, but they don't really have much control over it. Climate falls into that. A lot of what's happening in terms of climate and the global warming and the things that we're seeing are not being driven by what's happening here at all, but they're impacting Africa. And then there are the other set, he said, are the ones where there's actually some control and you can actually change the problem itself. In the first instance, one of the, I think, important things is to have voice on the global stage. And Asset has been one of the organizations kind of trying to be that voice, to present that data, not only to internally in Africa, to African leaders, but also externally to kind of present that to the rest of the world. On the other side, the internal kind of issues is, first of all, continued issues with stability and governance. One of the problems that happens, I think it happens everywhere in the world, and that is that when you get a new regime that comes in, a new president, a new party, there's no need to start all over. Right? That there needs to be some continuation of projects because projects are long-term investments. And it's that, I'd say that's one of the things I was thinking about when I think about some of Asset's work, because our focus is so much on long-term growth, that it's important to figure out how do you define sort of shorter-term wins so that everyone can feel like that they have something they can lay claim to. And so I think that's one of the challenges that's internal. On the I probably could go on with challenges, but I'm going to move to some opportunities. I think on the opportunities, as I referenced earlier, first of all, technological change, AI, lots of things is really scary and has all kinds of ways in which we need to make sure we create the right guardrails around them. But there's also some opportunities there. There are, because it's another kind of transformation of how work gets done. And we've seen when that happens, if you can step in and identify what those new jobs, what those new things that are needed, and be an early mover in that, then there's an opportunity to kind of really create some economic activity and prosperity. You see that happening with the call centers that India kind of stepped in, and then the coding is now probably going to be replaced by AI, but what else is coming after that? So one of the things that I think that is a role that Asset can play is to help to be the forecaster. What we want is to identify what is that next thing, where is it going, and then get there ahead of it. And so that you can be one of the first movers. So I think that's one big opportunity. The second big opportunity, I've been traveling a lot lately, and almost everywhere, everyone in the world is addressing the fact that they have an aging population. Africa also has an aging population, but it has a young population. And that creates a certain kind of positive energy, if we can tap into it, that is another space for opportunity. And here I'm going to probably sound a little maybe over-romanticizing, but I see so much creativity emerging. And when I think about technology and what technology can replace and what it can't, I think there's pretty much a consensus that AI is, they can make some cute drawings, but they're not going to replace the sort of really creative work that we see come out of the continent. They can design maybe a nice dress, but it's not going to be a really interesting new style or design or music and so on. And that is a space that I think, particularly if you can combine it with the tech skills, which we know are present here, that there's a space to occupy, to put a footprint.
That is a high note on which to end. I'm really excited for the opportunities that we can take advantage of and how we can also work to address some of these challenges. Thank you so much, Cecilia, for joining us on the Spotlight.
Thank you.
So thank you all our viewers out there for also joining us. This has been the African Transformation Spotlight. We will see you again next time on the next edition. My name is Belinda Ayamga, and it's a bye for now.